Everybody have a seat, please. Second.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to start by asking you about the iCloud extraction that you looked at in comparison to the call detail records to determine that there were some messages from the call detail records that did not appear in the iCloud consistent with having been deleted, okay?
Consistent with not being there.
With not being there, excuse me. When you were using the call detail records to come up with your 3,084 text messages, SMS or MMS messages, were you just looking at the total numbers of text messages or the actual content to confirm that they were in fact text messages?
Frankly, that's the overall number, yes.
Okay, so that's the would you agree that sometimes when a cell phone is powered up, it receives you a notification that appears as a text message to alert you that you have a voicemail, for example?
It could do that occasionally, yes.
And that could appear to be a text message, although it's not.
It could.
So those were not excluded from that overall 3,084 number.
That's true.
Did you also look for that same time period Mr. Zanganeh asked you about at Catherine McBanoa's call detail records compared to her iCloud messages?
The copy of the iCloud messages I had for her didn't have content to them, so I wasn't able to compare them.
Did you compare the numbers?
No, I wasn't able to see the messages that were sent and received.
So despite the fact that some of those text messages did not appear on the iCloud, there was still evidence in Charlie Adelson's iCloud that Charlie Adelson and Catherine McBanoa were communicating.
That's correct.
And numerous of those messages were deleted.
That's true.
With respect to communications between Charlie Adelson or Luis Rivera, you found no evidence that Charlie Adelson communicated with Luis Rivera, did you?
That's true.
How many cell towers are there, cell sites are there between Charlie Adelson's residence in South Florida and Catherine McBanoa's?
I didn't count the number of towers, but it's a fair distance, so there's going to be a large number of towers.
Would you agree that the towers are closer together in a highly populated area such as the one relevant to this case?
Absolutely.
Okay. They're not miles and miles apart, these towers, are they?
That's correct.
Specifically, with respect to the time period on the morning of July 19th, 2014, between I believe it was 10:02 and 10:32 a.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
We were talking about a cell site or tower that Catherine McBanoa's phone was communicating with. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
You would agree with me that the cell site Catherine McBanoa was communicating with during that time frame on July 19th, 2014 could be consistent with Jessica Rodriguez's house?
There was certainly intent.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, let me ask that again. Do you agree that the cell site Catherine McBanoa's phone is communicating with the morning of July 19th during that 10 to 10:30 time frame could be consistent with Jessica Rodriguez's house?
There's certainly activity during that time period that could be, yes.
Consistent with the house?
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that 11% of the activity for that particular antenna. Did you remember that 11% amount?
I do.
Would that be consistent with Catherine McBanoa being at Jessica Rodriguez's house as being her friend?
It could be.
Okay, one moment, Judge.
If I clarify a point on that, when you say, I think you said 11.5%, are you talking about in usage time or in number of incidents?
Your Honor, that's the number of instances.
Okay.
I have no further questions, Judge.
Right.
Thank you.
Garcia.
You heard Ms. Norris ask you if there's any evidence of any activity between Charlie Adelson and Luis Rivera, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you said no, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's because the evidence that you have is the one iPhone that's related to Luis Rivera, correct?
Objection leading.
Sustained.
How many phones did you make that determination of that belonged to Luis Rivera?
None.
Were you aware if Luis Rivera had multiple throw phones?
I understand there's a number of devices that have been connected to him.
Do you have those phone numbers?
I don't have them now, no.
So when Ms. Norris, when the prosecutor, asked you if there's any correlation between Charlie Adelson and Luis Rivera, you don't have all of Luis Rivera's contacts, correct?
Correct.
And if Charlie Adelson had been making FaceTime calls, would there be a record of that in the iCloud?
There could be.
Could there potentially not be a record of it if you deleted it right after you did it?
Correct.
As someone that testifies with regards to cell usage and telephones in general, are you aware that people that are involved in nefarious activities like drug dealers or gang members often use disposable phones?
Objection, lack of foundation, and
Overruled.
I am familiar with that, yes.
And is that true?
It is.
No further questions.
All right, and juror, have a question of this witness? All right, if not, you may step down. Do we need to keep him further?
Not from us.
Anybody need him further? No, Your Honor. All right, you're excused.
Thank you.
Call your next witness.
Judge, if I can just get a few minutes to consult, we have no other witnesses, and then we need to make a determination as to whether or not my client's going to testify.
But we just got here, 5 minutes.
I understand that, but Mr. Garcia is here.
All right, we'll give you 10 minutes.
Could you please I can have a discussion with Mr. Garcia?
You need to discuss that with the bailiffs. And, okay. I need to make one comment at the jury's house. I do just want to put the attorneys on alert that if a defendant decides not to testify, I am going to colloquy that defendant to make sure they understand that that's their decision and they have a right to testify if they so choose. So just wanted to give you a heads up. So if you're having that discussion, we'll take 10 minutes. Be seated, please. So how are we proceeding, Mr. Stankin?
Judge, we're going to be resting.
Okay, so Mr. Garcia does not choose to testify.
Correct, Judge. We had a final conversation with Mr. Garcia in the cell behind the courtroom, and he confirmed what our position had been throughout the pendency of the case, but he's not going to testify.
All right, let's place him under oath, Madam Clerk.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
All right, state your name, please, sir.
Garcia.
And Mr. Garcia, are you currently under the influence of any alcohol, drugs, or medication?
No, Your Honor.
I'm not picking on you. I do this in all cases where a defendant chooses not to testify. You have a good lawyer, and you should consider his advice. But ultimately, he's not the one on trial. Ultimately, you're the one on trial, and only you can decide whether you should testify or not. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do.
I hear lots of claims after the fact of defendants come back and they say, my lawyer told me I could not testify, or somebody pressured me into not testifying. There are many things that are up to a lawyer to decide that are strategic decisions during the course of the trial. But one of the things the courts have left to a defendant to decide is whether to testify or not. That's strictly your decision. Do you understand that?
I understand that, sir.
Has anybody told you anything different?
No, sir.
Has anybody tried to pressure you into not testifying?
No, sir.
Do you have any questions about your right to testify?
No, I do not.
All right. You have a right not to testify, and if you should so decide, I will tell the jury that they should not hold that against you. You also have a right to testify. If you do testify, I'll tell the jury that they should consider your testimony just like any other witness. Do you understand those two things?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any question about that?
No, sir.
Do you wish to testify?
No, I do not.
All right, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right, so, if you're ready with your first witness?
If I could step outside.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes, you do. All right, so I'll say, call your next witness, and you rest. Let's have a jury.
All rise for the jury.
All right, everybody be seated. Ms. Sanguinet, you may call your next witness.
At this time, the defense rests.
All right. McVanoa may call their first witness.
Yes, Your Honor, I'm gonna step over that.
And I believe you testified before, did you
Yes,
not?
sir, I did.
All right, you remain under oath.
Yes, sir.
You may proceed.
Sir. Oops. Tough here.
Investigator, good afternoon.
Somebody else's thing.
Not on.
I guess this was Mr. Sawicki's. May proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Investigator Dilmore,
Yes, sir.
how are you?
Good, thank you.
Again, you work for the Technical Operations
Just for
Unit.
the record, state your name again, please, sir.
Investigator Mike Dilmore, Dilmore.
Now, you testified earlier in this trial, but you were in uniform, right?
Correct.
You had the camera up on your
Yes,
right
sir.
shoulder.
Yeah, I came straight from the office that day.
When we called you before, you were talking about the Apple iCloud, and you had explained how the information could show up on my phone, and you explained Celebrate and all of that.
Yes, sir.
All right. With your work on this case, correct me if I'm wrong, that in May of 2016, you received 2 LG phones.
Yes, sir.
Now, the Technical Operations Unit, specifically yourself, worked on an extraction report for both of those phones, right?
Yes, sir.
One of the phones, the device name was an Optimus 560.
Yes, sir.
Now, your understanding is that those phones were the result of the arrest of Sigfredo Garcia.
Yes, sir, I believe so.
Prior to your testimony today, I'd given you a CD and some information of stuff to review before today. Have you had an opportunity to review it?
Yes, sir.
In your examination of the extraction report, did you find that there were communications with phone number 305-563-3341?
Objection, relevance?
Let's go that way.
Investigator. So, with your evaluation of the phone that came from Sigfredo Garcia, did you find that there were communications with the phone number 305-563-3341?
Yes, sir.
And correct me if I'm wrong, those communications were around the time of May of 2016.
Yes, sir.
And the name that they were saved under was T***.
Yes, sir.
T what?
T And then the little star symbol?
I believe it was just T. I think the asterisk, if you look at the other ones in there, is on all of the ones that were pulled from the contact list.
Correct me if I'm wrong, there's 8 communications.
Yes, the ones that I've looked through, yes, sir.
These communications begin and end in the month of May of 2016.
All right, give me 1 second. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, they do.
Make sure you keep your voice up. Speak
Sorry.
to that microphone,
Yes, sir.
a little quiet.
Let's change gears. In your evaluation of the extraction report for Sigfredo Garcia's phone, did you find saved within the context the phone number 954-581-1747?
Yes, sir.
Let's change gears a little bit again. You already testified how you reviewed the Celebrite information for Charles Adelson.
Yes, sir.
Did you find that same phone number saved in his iCloud information?
Yes, sir.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the phone number for Sigfredo Garcia's phone, it's saved as Sully, M-E-C-H,
Correct.
and in Charles Adelson's phone, it's saved as Eco-Friendly Shop.
Correct.
You would agree with me that this is a contact in common between the two of them.
It does appear that way, yes, sir.
If I can have a brief moment, Your Honor.
You may.
One brief moment, Your Honor. Investigator Dilmore, a few more questions. Going back to the extraction report for Sigfredo Garcia, do you have a phone number associated with that phone?
Give me one
There were
moment.
2 phones, if I understood right.
That's correct, Your Honor. Let me give the specific phone. You had a flip phone and you had a smartphone, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm talking about the Optimus 560,
Right.
whatever that is.
Looks like 786-357-3966.
Are you sure?
I'm looking at the right one. That's what it looks like, sir.
Okay. Within the extraction report, specifically the messages for T, did you find that the person sending the message was identifying themselves as Tato?
Give me a moment to look them up.
I'd refer your attention to message 417.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
If I could turn your attention now
Since
to,
you're reading it spelled, what you're reading, please.
The name is, it says it's me, Tato, T-A-T-O,
what's the date on that message?
May 11th of 2016.
Is it your understanding, if you know, that during that time frame, Luis Rivera was actually in federal prison?
I don't know.
If I could turn your attention to message 307. Does the name Luis Rivera appear in that message?
Yes, sir, it does.
And what's the date of that message?
May 14th, 2016.
You, being in the technical operations unit, you have Sigfredo Garcia's phone. Does it appear that there's communication with Luis Rivera in May of 2016?
I don't know Luis Rivera's phone number.
Based on the content of the message.
Judge, I'm going to object to this as speculation.
Sustained.
One brief moment, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Garcia? Any cross?
No,
All right, stay.
No questions, Judge.
All right, any juror have a question of this witness? All right, you can step down. Do we need to keep Investigator Dilmore any further?
Yes.
All right, you want him retained under subpoena, so, all right,
Yeah.
you remain under the rule. Your next witness? You'll need to retrieve whoever you want next, Mr. DeCoste.
I'm sorry?
You'll need to retrieve whoever you want next. Okay.
Investigator Corbitt.
Someone would. We don't have anyone to go get them. Seems like we've seen you before. Haven't we?
You have.
State your name for the record, please.
Certainly, it's Christopher Corbitt, and again, that's Corbitt.
And you remain under oath.
Yes, sir.
May proceed.
Sergeant Corbitt, how are you?
Wonderful.
I want to take your attention back to your direct examination, where the government was asking you about the day prior to the homicide.
Yes, sir.
And you had your slides up, and the question of whether Wendy Adelson was in the vicinity of the Markel house, your answer was, it's possible.
Yes,
You had no slide for that one.
that's correct.
For it to have been possible, she would have been hitting on a tower that was not the one closest to her, correct?
I'm sorry. I'm not sure what you're asking there specifically.
Let me give you some context. We talked about it on cross-examination. You know that Luis Rivera has testified saying that the day prior to the homicide, in between 9 and 12, that he sees Wendy Adelson at Dan Markel's house. You remember that?
Yes,
And you were asked questions by the prosecution whether it was possible if she was at the house that morning, July 17th in the morning.
if I recall, the question was, is it possible that they could have seen one another? I don't recall the specific time frame being added to that.
So you had no slide showing that she was hitting on a tower in between 9 and 12 in the morning on July 17th, right?
That's correct.
Because she wasn't hitting on a tower immediately close to the house at Trescott during that morning.
That's correct.
Your Honor, the defense and the prosecution have a stipulation that I'd like to read into the record.
Is it in writing, both sides? All parties agree?
Yes, sir.
Mr.
State this.
Garcia aware of this? Have any issue?
I've been put on notice, I haven't seen it specifically.
All right, well,
Yeah, this is fine.
all right. I think I need to explain to the jury what a stipulation involves, so give me just a second. As I've told you a couple of times, what the attorneys say is not evidence, and you should not consider it as such. However, as in all legal matters, we have to have exceptions. An exception to that is a stipulation. We encourage the attorneys to stipulate the matters, saves our time, your time, my time. So what we call a stipulation is when the attorneys and the parties agree that certain facts are true. That's called a stipulation of fact. You must accept stipulated facts as having been proven. However, the significance of these facts, as with all facts, is for you to decide. In this case, there are stipulated facts that I guess Mr. DeCoste is going to read to you. Generally, I read them to a jury, but if you desire to read them, that'd be fine, right? The stipulation of facts is that the Markel children were enrolled at Creative Preschool, which is located in Tallahassee, Florida. Their drop-off pickup schedule for the days leading up to the homicide are as follows. Monday, July 14, 2014, dropped off at 8:55 a.m. by Dan Markel, picked up at 5 p.m. by Dan Markel. Tuesday, July 15, 2014, dropped off at 8:25 a.m. by Dan Markel, picked up at 4:50 p.m. by Dan Markel. Wednesday, July 16, 2014, dropped off at 9 a.m. by Dan Markel, picked up at 4:30 p.m. by Wendy Adelson. Thursday, July 17, 2014, dropped off at 8:30 a.m. by Wendy Adelson, picked up at 4:45 p.m. by Dan Markel. Friday, July 18, 2014, dropped off at 8:50 a.m. by Dan Markel. Have I accurately presented the stipulation to the jury?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
The parties in agreement?
Yes, sir.
All right, if you want your sheet back.
Sure. Thank you. Change gears. Your direct examination and some of the redirect examination by Ms. Norris, you talked about how the Prius in question was parked at a property adjacent to Catherine McBano's. You remember that?
Yes.
You remember the slide where Catherine McBano's apartment building parking lot is in the lower right, and then it was parked in a parking lot that was across the street up to the left.
Yes.
Where does Anthony Ortiz live?
I do not know.
Do you know whether that parking lot corresponded to Anthony Ortiz's apartment?
I do not.
Next topic. On redirect examination, Ms. Norris talked to you about the path of travel the morning of July 19th of Catherine McBano's handset. You remember that?
I do, yes.
And it was on redirect where she asked you to punch in. You don't have your stuff on with you today, right?
I do not.
Where you had at the top of the screen Charles Adelson's address,
Yes.
and you were asked questions of whether it would be consistent because Indra Velasquez's property was south into the east.
That's correct.
You weren't asked the question to input the address of Francis McBanoa, my client's brother, were you?
I was not.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the address for Francis McBanoa is very close to Charles Adelson's address.
I would not say very close to Mr. Adelson's address. It's actually very close to the Adelson Institute, which is north of Mr. Adelson's address.
The path of travel that morning, correct me if I'm wrong, would also be consistent with Miss McBanoa driving south from her brother's residence and picking up her children from Yindra Velasquez's house.
It could be, yes.
With your training and experience on everything data related, you can't say one way or the other. Can you?
I don't think it's a complete question.
I'll rephrase
One
it.
way or the other, what?
Can you say that one's more likely to have happened than the other?
Again, I don't know what the two things are we're weighing out, Mr. DeCosta.
Perfect. Scenario one, leaving Charles Adelson's address, driving to Jessica Rodriguez / Luis Rivera's house. Or the other scenario, driving from her brother's house, picking up her kids at Yindra Velasquez's home.
So the difference between the two, we look at, one, the locations. The cell site for the 1031 event that ended at 1032 would certainly not be consistent with Yindra's address. That was definitely further north, and the cell site or the sector that handset was communicating with would certainly not be consistent with her residence. In addition, we looked at the communications, who she was actually calling or talking to or attempting to talk to, and that was not Miss Yindra.
Now, when you're using these pings, those are only momentary, correct? It's not something that you're saying that constantly between the beginning time of early at 10 o'clock up until a little bit after 10:30. You're not saying that it's constantly communicating with the tower during that entire time. There's just intermittent communications during that time frame.
That is correct, and we went through each of those individual communications, and I don't recall the exact times of them. There were some around 10:04, 10:06, in the 10:20 time frame. But for each of those events, there was a beginning and ending cell site. So we had a location for the beginning of that event, and then however long that event was, if it was 1 minute or 2 minutes, at the end of that, we would have another location, that ending cell site. So it's only when we have those events, those beginning and ending events, that we would have a location to speak of.
One brief moment, Your Honor. Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, Garcia, say.
Yes, sir. I only want to ask you about the location of the rental vehicles involved in this case based on the GPS pings, if you will, or GPS data.
I was beyond the scope of direct, Your Honor. I didn't ask anything about rental vehicles.
That's not my understanding. I'll overrule that objection.
You were asked about the Prius being parked next to Catherine McBanois' house, weren't you?
I was, yes.
Wasn't that actually the original rental car from the June trip that was parked at Catherine McBanois' residence when they returned to Miami from Tallahassee?
Well, I think both vehicles were there at some point, and again, not having the date in front of me, but there was one where the rental vehicle was actually in the parking lot of the actual apartment building, and then one when it was across the street. And that may have been the June event.
Okay. And then for the location of the Prius in the July, now talking about the July trip, the location for the Prius after the homicide in July was consistent with Shrimp or Stephanie Carmona's residence.
It was after the trip back. It was, yes.
Okay, so back in June, when we have not the Prius but it was a Hyundai Sonata, that GPS ping near Catherine McBanois' house. You also have phone records showing events for Catherine McBanois and Sigfredo Garcia consistent with Ms. McBanois' residence.
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Redirect.
Nothing, Your Honor.
All right, any juror have a question at this point? All right, you can step down. Maybe we'll see you again. All right, next witness.
Call Jason Newlin.
Up here, please, sir. You would face the clerk and be sworn, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony given in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I swear.
Have a seat. Slide it in, please, sir.
If you would please introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Jason Newlin, Jasonnewlin. I'm an investigator with the State Attorney's Office here in Tallahassee.
Now, throughout this trial, you've been in the courtroom during testimony, right?
I've been in and out, yes.
Now, the reason for that is because you work very closely with these prosecutors, right?
That's correct.
You're actually integral in the part of organizing the evidence, the discovery, right?
To say the least.
Let's talk about that. On any case, including this one, as the prosecution progresses, you receive from law enforcement reports, evidence, and that's organized by the State Attorney's Office, right?
We receive it and we turn it over. We organize it at some point, yeah.
Well, talking about your role, you help out in the organization, in the review of the information as it comes in, correct?
I try to the best I can, yes.
And that includes evidence, police reports, right?
Yes.
And then that's provided over to defense attorneys like myself during a case.
That's correct.
That's normal in all cases, right?
For the most part, yes.
And actually, once you're under an obligation that once you receive the information, the reports, to give it over timely to the defense, right? This is not an
necessarily
accusation.
my job. No, I give it to the prosecutors and they turn it over, yeah.
You would agree with me that there's been times in this case that you've provided over to myself pieces of evidence.
Yes.
switch to another topic. Talk about the media on this case.
Okay.
You yourself, you appeared on Dateline, right?
I did.
Miss Kappelman, I believe, appeared on 2020.
She did.
In those media appearances, the theory of the case was laid out, right?
Part of it, yes.
Now, your Dateline interview, that was after Miss McBanwell was arrested, right? If you remember.
I honestly don't recall.
You would agree with me, though, that well prior to Miss McBanwell's arrest, there was a lot of publicity on this case.
Prior to Ms. McMahon's arrest, there's
Correct.
been a lot of publicity, yes.
So, Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia are arrested in May of 2016.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lot of media at that point.
In May of 16, yeah, the case had garnered some media attention, yes.
And that media put out there the theory of the government, the people that they believed were behind it, the people that they believed were involved, right?
Well, a lot of our theory is in a probable cause, and once an arrest is effected, the probable cause is released, and your theory is out.
Now, in this case, the probable cause affidavit for the arrest of Catherine McBanwell was actually leaked months before, right?
That I'm not aware of.
You would agree with me, though, that prior to October of 2016, or better yet, prior to September of 2016, the government's theory of prosecution was out there, who they believed was involved.
Honestly, there's been, 3 probable causes? If it's 10 pages, 9 pages are exactly the same, so there's very little changed.
I want to make sure that you and I are on the same topic. Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia are arrested. In the months after that, June, July, and August, there's attention on the case, right?
There's some, yes.
There's reports coming in, that's going over to the defense attorneys for Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia.
Yes.
There's news reports on the case, the theory behind it, right?
Yes.
Now, you've been over to the Leon County Jail many times, right?
I have.
And at the beginning of his prosecution, Luis Rivera spent some time there.
He did.
They have television over there, don't they?
They do in Leon County, yes.
They also have phones.
They do, but the pod in which Mr. Rivera was housed in did not have TV.
We're talking about phones now, though.
Phones he did have.
So he'd be able to communicate with the outside world.
Yes.
Now, back over to the topic of television. Even within the jail, there's ways for inmates to communicate, right?
Yes.
I mean, they go to the extent of sometimes talking through the toilets, right?
I've heard of that, but I've never witnessed that.
They find ways to communicate,
They
right?
do.
Once in federal custody, Luis Rivera also has the ability to be able to email, right?
They can email in federal custody, yes.
I'm sorry, is there a problem? Okay, we're good? Okay.
Now, the means of communication, I mean, it goes to the extent that now they have a tablet that they can video chat with loved ones, right?
Those have been taken away, but they did briefly.
Let's go back to May of 2016. Luis Rivera is arrested. Chuck Collins is appointed as his attorney, right?
So Rivera was actually, I believe Rivera didn't get transported to Tallahassee until June of 16. But yes, Chuck Collins was appointed as attorney.
All right. The theory, again, is out there. Luis Rivera cooperates, right?
Eventually, yes.
Catherine McBanwell was then immediately arrested the following day.
Yes.
Now, the goal of your office was to get Catherine to cooperate against Charles Adelson, right?
The goal is to get Catherine to tell us her involvement.
I'm sorry.
To tell us what her involvement is.
To cooperate, correct?
If you want to call it cooperation, if Ms. McBanwell would, I don't know how to put it.
If she were to tell you that she wasn't involved, you wouldn't drop charges, would you?
If there was documentation or proof of that, I don't have the decision to make that. That's not my authority.
In fact, she sat down with you and discussed the case with you, didn't she?
She,
Let's go sidebar, please.
Investigator, around the month of August of 2016, you were present in Jefferson County with Ms. Kappelman and others, while Mr. Rivera and his attorney, I believe David Collins, were in another room and notes were being passed back and forth, right?
Yes.
Now, the purpose of that meeting was that he wanted to make a deal to cooperate for you, right? For you and your office.
The purpose for us was to see what information Mr. Rivera had to offer.
And if he had something to offer, a deal would be struck, right?
That would be between the prosecutors and defense attorneys.
Now, you weren't in the room with Luis Rivera, were you?
No.
But you were taking in the info, right?
Yes.
It wasn't recorded,
No.
but again, you're taking down details.
Not writing details down, just sitting there listening to what he has to offer.
All right, but you're mentally taking them in, right?
Yes.
Specifically about a gun, right?
Yeah, there was an incident with a gun.
Now, with the information that he gives on that day in August of 2016,
Right.
you have enough of a mental picture that on August 15th, you go out to a place and you're looking for a body of water, a bridge near Interstate 10 between Tallahassee and Interstate 75 corridor, right?
It was specifically 2 bridges and a body of water, and between I-10 and I-75 somewhere.
Now, I saw you look down. Do you have your report up there?
Yes, I do.
That's from August 29, 2016.
It's going to be around that time, yes.
All right, so on August 15th, you go out there and you have enough specifics from the conversation with Luis Rivera that you go and spend the time to travel out there again, that you're out near the Interstate 75 corridor, right?
All I had was 2 bridges and a body of water, and I drove as far as I could make it that day. I went all the way to the Swanee River, which has 2 bridges and a body of water, but it was too big of an area to go by myself. So I went back, and then another day went with 2 other people.
We'll get to that in a second. But the point is here that with that exchange with Luis Rivera in the Jefferson County Jail, you get, and I agree, it's limited details, but you get details that then put you on the road to drive out looking for this body of water, right?
Right.
Now, on August 26th, you go back out and you go to the Osceola River, right?
Correct.
And you bring with you 2 other people from the state attorney's office.
Yes.
Investigator Sparkman
Yes.
and Analyst Balboni.
Yes.
Now, Analyst Balboni, he brings out a metal detector with him too, right?
He did.
So you have enough details from this exchange with Luis Rivera that you've got 3 personnel, you got 2 trips, and you're driving around looking for a gun, right?
Yes.
From details that were given by Luis Rivera in that August meeting.
2 bridges and a body of water, and that was the closest one.
Luis Rivera never mentioned Catherine's name alongside those other details that you took in, did he?
Luis Rivera never spoke to me.
We're talking about the information as it's flowing from Luis Rivera and his attorney over to yourself and the prosecutors. You're taking in information, details, enough so for you to do this investigation. Luis Rivera never mentioned Catherine.
I honestly don't recall.
Would your deposition help you remember?
Sure.
Page 39, starting on lines 24, continuing on to page 40. Take a look at that.
Starting on which line?
I'm going to read it again because there's a couple of them.
Okay.
We got pages 39 through 40. So the last 2 lines of page 39 and the first line of page 40. And then you can also take a look at page 43, lines 1 through 3.
Okay. The first 2 lines were, you asked me if you
43.
mentioned Katie, and I said, I don't know.
You have no memory of Luis Rivera giving information to his attorney over to you and your team of Catherine's name. Is that accurate?
I mean, I don't recall those specific meetings, no.
But you remember the talk about the gun?
The gun is what stood out to me to see if we could find it, yeah.
All right, so no deal was struck that day, right?
Which day?
This is the day that you're at Jefferson County with Georgia Kappelman, Luis Rivera's in the other room with his attorney, David Collins, and information's going back and forth. No deal was struck that day, right?
I wasn't a part of any of the deal negotiations or plea negotiations.
Let's fast forward now about a month and a half to September 30th of 2016.
Okay.
You were present at the Jefferson County Jail again, right?
Yes,
Again with Miss Kappelman.
yes,
Luis Rivera on that day finally names Catherine, right?
I don't know if it's finally, but he did say it that day, yes,
The next day, Catherine McBann was arrested,
yes.
and Luis Rivera gets his deal, right?
Again, I wasn't a part of the plea negotiations.
You know that Luis Rivera takes a plea a couple days after that, right?
I know he pled in October, maybe? But I don't, like I said, I don't have the specifics on that.
Let's talk about the investigation of the gun a little bit more now.
Okay.
When you, Sparkman, and Balboni were out there at the river, you find a gun, right?
We do.
But it doesn't match up to the projectiles that were found in this case, does it?
No.
And you knew that right off the bat because you know guns.
I could tell had nothing to do with this case.
But you didn't just say, leave it there, we're out of here.
No.
You needed to do due diligence and objective investigation of that firearm, right?
Right. I submitted under this case for analysis from an expert.
Because it could be related somehow. Right?
I wasn't just going to throw it away or put it, hide it under a different case. So the best decision was put it under this case because that's what we were looking for.
You took a series of photographs of this gun in the mud,
Yes.
about 15 of them.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Now again, you had Investigator Sparkman and Analyst Balboni there with you,
Yes.
right? You also had a representative from the Madison County Sheriff's Office with you.
We did.
You had Madison County Sheriff's Office take possession of the firearm,
Correct.
impound it,
No, they signed it directly over to me.
and on that paperwork of signing it over to you, it was in relation to this case, not some other case.
Correct.
You then take the gun and you bring it over to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
My normal thing would be to turn it into Tallahassee Police Department and they submit it to FDLE, and that should be what I did here.
Do you not remember?
That's been three plus years ago.
Would taking a look at your deposition help? Page 45, lines 19 through 21.
What are you asking me to review? Because it's what I just said.
You submitted the gun over to FDLE?
So you asked me the gun that was submitted to the lab.
Let me ask you a different question. Were you present, because you're removed from the rule of sequestration, were you present in the courtroom when Danabeth Ritchie testified?
No.
All right. Are you aware of her testimony
I
about
know
the
she
testing on that,
testified. I know she testified, no.
about the testing of that gun?
No, if she testified to that gun, I don't know. I'm not aware.
All right. So the whole point that we're getting here is there's a gun that you don't believe is tied to the murder in any way, but you still objectively investigated it. You'd agree with that, right?
Correct.
Let's talk about your procedure specifically with this case. You're working with the Tallahassee Police Department and also the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Yes.
A piece of information comes in that somebody wants to talk. You let the FBI, the Tallahassee Police Department know, hey, there's somebody that wants to talk, there's somebody that has information, right?
Yes.
In December of 2016, now this would be after Luis Rivera has pled,
Okay.
you and your office receive a letter from Jennifer Mosley. You remember that?
I do.
And Ms. Mosley says that she has new information or confirmation of facts on Luis Rivera. You remember that, right?
I do, vaguely.
If you don't remember, would it help you to take a look at her letter?
Possibly.
May I review the letter first, Judge?
What's that?
May I review the item?
Certainly.
Let me know if this helps remember.
I mean, I remember this letter, yes.
Now, that letter comes in after Luis Rivera has become a state's witness, right?
Yes.
And it talks about having information.
Objection, hearsay.
Investigative steps, Your Honor.
Sustained objection.
Did you ever meet with Miss Mosley?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
Withdrawn. You never met with Miss Mosley, did you?
I don't know. I've actually met with Miss Mosley before, but I don't know if it was on this case or not.
Now, if she were to say something that would impeach Luis Rivera, that would be bad for your theory and prosecution on the case, right?
I'm sure it would.
Let's go to another person now. Juan Marcos Vega.
Okay.
You never shared that information with the Tallahassee Police Department, did you?
Yes, we did.
Who'd you share it with?
We would have been in constant communication back and forth with the supervisors and the investigators over there.
Never shared it with Patrick Sanford.
He would have been aware, whether they remembered or not, I don't know.
So, the Leon County State Attorney's Office in the fall of 2016, right around the time that Luis Rivera is becoming a state's witness, you receive a letter from Imran Hussein, right?
Correct.
That leads you to have a phone call with Imran Hussein, right?
Correct.
And Imran Hussein tells you that there's some...
Objection, hearsay.
Let's go sidebar. Investigator.
Yes.
After receiving this information, you yourself alone drove down to South Florida and met with Juan Marcos Vega, correct?
I drove to South Florida. I had a Miami-Dade police officer with me.
Lee Cout, correct?
Yes.
Detective Lee Cout.
Yes.
You went in and you spoke to him.
I did.
You would agree with me that it was, that in your words, that it was the wrong approach.
Objection violates the ruling you just made, Judge.
Overruled. Call for yes or no.
Investigator, I'm not asking you for the substance of the communication with Juan Marcos Vega. But you would agree with me, your words, that the way that you questioned him was the wrong approach.
Yes.
Object. Hearsay is in the question.
Overruled. All right, that's been asked and answered. Move on, Mr. DeCoste.
You recorded that interview, right?
Move on, Mr. DeCoste.
Oh, this
We're
goes
done with this subject.
This goes to the next topic, Your Honor.
Well, let's get to the next topic.
The meeting with Luis Rivera on 9/30. You remember that? You were present.
Yes.
That wasn't recorded.
No.
The one that we just spoke about was.
Yes.
Moving forward now in time to 2019. A woman named Amy Manka, your interview with her, not recorded.
No.
Brenda Ward,
No.
2 meetings, July and August of 2019, not recorded, right?
Correct.
One brief moment, Your Honor. Two quick things on those names. With the meeting with Amy Manka, you went to her, she didn't come to you, right?
Correct.
Brenda Ward, she came to you, or you went to her, she didn't come to you.
Correct.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Proceed.
Real brief. Mr. DeCosta was asking you about Juan Marcos Vega, that is that was one of the defendants on Luis Rivera's Latin King indictment, is that correct?
Correct.
Were there any other Latin Kings that you interviewed that were on the RICO indictment that Luis Rivera was on?
No.
No further questions.
Say,
In reference to the August 16th meeting, that was the very first meeting that had anything to do with Mr. Rivera's cooperation. Do you agree?
Yes.
All right, and that was the meeting where nobody talked to Mr. Rivera personally except for his counsel.
Correct.
Okay. And during that meeting, I think your testimony is basically what you got out of it is that you were going to go out and look for a gun.
Correct.
All right. Did you take notes or do anything to memorialize the substance of what Mr. Rivera was saying?
No, I did not.
Okay. So specifically, you were asked, did he mention Catherine Magbano in that meeting? Do you know, yes or no, whether he did or not?
I really don't remember.
Okay. And so can you tell this jury that there was anything in that meeting that came through Mr. Rivera's lawyer that was inconsistent with his later statements?
No.
Did anybody during that meeting that you observed write down or indicate to Mr. Rivera's attorney what it was that Mr. Rivera needed to say to get a deal, or who it was that he needed to implicate to help himself?
No.
No further questions.
redirect.
Investigator Newlin, the only people that knew what happened in that room where Luis Rivera was in is him and his attorney, right?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Right, hey, Jerry, I have a question of this witness. All right, you can step down. Call your next witness.
Craig Isom.
Come back up here, please. And state your name for us again, please,
Craig Isom.
and you remain under oath.
Yes.
You may proceed, Mr. Cox.
Thank you. Investigator, how are you?
Good.
I want to ask you some questions about your September 30th, 2016 meeting with Luis Rivera. Do you have your report?
Yes, sir.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Luis Rivera tells you in that September 3rd, or before I go further, the only record that we have of this meeting is your report, right?
To my understanding.
We have no recording,
No.
no other reports.
I don't know of any other reports.
Luis Rivera tells you that the paperwork that was in the car with him and Sigfredo Garcia was a color photo, right?
Can you refer to the paragraph, please? Or give
Page
me the-
3, right in the middle of the page.
So,
So, third body down.
well, I may be looking at a different format than you.
Sure, we'll do
You can
this.
just give me a key word on the beginning of the paragraph would be very helpful.
If I could first. Investigator, I'm going to give you the report as I have. it.
Okay.
So if you take a look at the third body down, second to last line, beginning with Rivera recalled.
Yes.
He told you the color photo, right?
I'm missing the words. You're looking down as you speak. He said what?
Color photo.
Okay.
Yes.
Go to the next body. during discussion, so Luis Rivera explains to you that during discussion with Sigfredo Garcia while waiting to see the target, that he learned the ex-wife's name was Wendy, right?
Yes,
And Garcia said hired Katie to have her ex-husband killed.
yes,
Wendy wasn't arrested, right?
no,
Now, Luis Rivera also explains to you how on the morning of July 17th, that he's allegedly by the house of Dan Markel and sees Wendy Adelson and the two boys, right? If you want to take a look at the bottom of page 3.
he asked who the lady was that was watching their car go by, and Garcia responded, that's the lady that wants this done.
Luis Rivera didn't tell you on September 30th the additional fact of, oh, I saw her walk down the driveway of Dan Markel's house and go into the house. He didn't share that with you, did he?
No,
Objection, improper impeachment.
that Wendy, who he identifies as Wendy, walked down the driveway and went into a house.
So I'm asking if Luis Rivera said something during September 30th, specifically the fact that when he saw this woman with these two kids, that he also saw the woman. Question?
Wendy saw this woman, is what I just heard. I want to make
We'll
sure.
back up. We'll back
Okay.
up. Did Luis Rivera on September 30th, did he say that the woman that he saw, that he claims Sigfredo Garcia identified as Wendy Adelson, that he saw that woman and the two boys walk down the driveway of Dan Markel's house and go into the house right after he saw him?
I didn't hear that. I never heard that.
Now, during your investigation, you actually learned that it was not possible that she could have been there with the boys because the boys were preschool, right?
Yes.
Let's go to the next page. During this September 30th, 2016 meeting, Luis Rivera tells you that on the second trip, they only brought one handgun, right? Fifth line down, page 4.
Yes.
Now going to the bottom of page 4, still on September 30th, 2016, Rivera explains to you how after the homicide that there was this apparent phone call between Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine McBanois, and all he tells you was that the words, "it's done," and there was an answer of, "I know." That's it, right? To make sure we're clear here, because you gave me a look there for a second. Luis Rivera says that after the homicide, that Sigfredo Garcia calls Catherine McBanois, says it's done, and that her response is only, "I know."
Yes.
Now, initially, Luis Rivera said that Garcia told him her response, right?
Yes.
And then during this meeting on September 30th, he then later clarified that he could actually hear the voice through the phone.
Yes.
Let's go to the next page. On September 30th, 2016, Luis Rivera tells you how on the morning of July 19th, that he received a call on his cell phone from Catherine. So we're on page 5, and we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
In your investigation of the case, you found out that it was not Catherine McBanois calling Luis Rivera, but the reverse.
To my understanding, is what I was told, yes.
Further, in his explanation of the morning of July 19th, he gives you the Latin king name of Hebero, right?
Yes.
Do you know Hebero's real name?
I don't recall it. I think we identified him at some point, but I don't recall his real name or his last name.
Ever met with Hebero?
No.
Ever know if Hebero is Anthony Ortiz or not?
Not quite sure if that was the name.
It's your understanding that Hebero is a Latin king,
Yes.
based on what Luis Rivera said.
Yes.
Your understanding of Latin kings is that they have a name like Luis Rivera is King Tato,
Yes.
right? That Anthony Ortiz is King Little Anthony, right?
I can't clarify that. I can't confirm that's the name, Latin king name.
The only thing he gives you that morning is the name Hebero, right?
Yeah, and that's a Spanish name. I don't know anything more than that as far as clarifying.
All right, let's talk about the money now. Luis Rivera says that the money came in a shopping bag, right?
Yes.
Not a brown bag.
He identified it as a disposable type grocery sack.
Like
bag.
like a Publix plastic bag.
I believe it was Publix or some type of plastic brown bag.
Now, he claimed that he took some of that money and he gave it to his mother
Yes.
and to his ex-wife, Jessica Rodriguez.
Yes.
You never met with Luis Rivera's mother to confirm or deny that, did you?
Nope.
And correct me if I'm wrong, that after you meet with Luis Rivera on September 30th, you allow him to use your personal cell phone to contact Jessica Rodriguez.
No. No, sir.
Did Luis Rivera contact Jessica Rodriguez after that September 30th meeting, if you know?
I don't know. Not in my presence.
One brief moment, Your Honor. Investigator, final questions. Luis Rivera never mentioned to you hoods and masks, did he?
One more time, I'm not sure I heard it right.
Late in the day, I'm talking quiet. He never mentioned hoods and masks, did he?
I don't remember that term in the September 30th interview.
So just to make sure that you have the question clear, September 30th, you're meeting with Luis Rivera, you're talking about the June trip and the July trip. Luis Rivera never mentions the bringing of hoods and masks, did he?
No.
Luis Rivera never mentioned to you the third trip to Tallahassee, did he?
No.
The third trip between, allegedly, Sigfredo Garcia and King Anthony. He never mentioned that, did he?
Rivera he did not mention that specifically, but he did mention that because Garcia did not need a map or anything else, he had to have been up here at some time before. But I don't know of a third trip.
Before you meet with him, correct me if I'm wrong, this meeting that you're having with him, you've been contacted by the state attorney's office. Luis Rivera wants to cut a deal. Need you to go in there and get his information.
Right.
And you go in there and you swear him in. We want the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Right? He never shared with you that there was a third trip by Sigfredo Garcia with King Anthony.
Not specifically that, but once again, when the question came up about how Garcia knew where to go in Tallahassee, he didn't need a map, he didn't need directions, so Luis shared that he must have already been here before. But I don't have any other knowledge than that.
That's not in your report, is it?
No.
Now, after whenever this was said, you, of course, immediately then went and met with King Anthony, right?
No.
Because the information that was given to you was not specific, saying the name King Anthony, right?
Correct. We didn't know who, if that was even, that was just Luis's assumption, Luis Rivera's assumption, that by not needing a map and not needing directions, He must have been here before.
One brief moment, Your Honor.
We're gonna have to work on Mr. DeCosta's definition of one question.
In my defense, Ms. Quast gave me a piece of paper with another question. No questions, Your Honor.
Garcia? Thinking it?
Oh, no.
Stay.
No, sir.
All right. Any juror have a question of this witness? All right. You can step down. Let's go sidebar with the attorney. We don't need to be Y'all okay with breaking for the night? All right. All right. 8:45 tomorrow, same place, same time. We'll have a good evening. Listen, buddy, have a seat. Let's come back to session for a moment. So, how much more are you anticipating, Mr. DeCosta?
I know, and I'm just conferring with it. An hour, and then the decision whether Ms. McGann was going to testify or not.
I will try and have that decision.
So, y'all go discuss that tonight?
Yes.
Okay. Any other issues from anybody?
Not from the state.
Your Honor, if I could bring up an evidentiary issue.
Okay.
Just to make sure that the court's clear on what we've been trying to do here. So I've tried a few times to move in an exhibit, and it's documents that were received in response to a subpoena by the state attorney's office to Apple. I have the business record certification. It's the same thing that I've shown with respect to the incorrect phone number from Louis Rivera. I have, and we have the witnesses testifying. We have the warrant that's sent to Apple, the business record certification from Apple, and also what Agent Sanford has identified as the response to the subpoena from Apple for the phone number for Louis Rivera. That has that information in there. He testified, it's in his report, he received this. We're seeking to move this in. I think that we've established enough, and especially with the business record certification, we've authenticated it. The business record certification works around hearsay. We also have Sherry Bennett that's coming to the stand, and she's the one that did the warrant to go to Apple to get these documents.
Okay. So what's in there other than his phone number?
I can hand it up to Your Honor.
Okay.
For the record, it's reported that was 25.
So the defense theory is that this shows another phone number for Mr. Rivera. Is that what you're saying?
Correct, Your Honor. It also impeaches him because he testified that he had a different phone number, or he testified that he had a certain phone number, yet the response from Apple is as to a different phone number. So there's multiple theories of which we believe that it is admissible at this point. And I would see.
Are you thinking, Ms. Kaufman?
No, sir, I didn't know if you were waiting on me
No,
or
no,
you were looking at
I
the
asked what the
exhibit.
state's position
I'm objecting, Judge. I'll rely on my previous relevance objection and lack of foundation since we don't know how this information is created and how it's inputted, whether it's done by the user or by the company, so I don't think it's properly admitted as a business record.
Your Honor, I can respond to that.
You may.
So, under the first prong, it would be that we have a business record certification and it's relevant on the issue. If it were something that were entered in by Louis Rivera, then it comes in for the purpose of impeachment. So there are two ways with which it can come in, either through the business record certification. It's already been authenticated. It's a matter of hearsay now. Either the business record certification or to impeach the testimony of Louis Rivera that the state elicited as to his phone number. So if he's entering into his iPhone a phone number that's different than the one that he testified about, then it's a matter of impeachment.
Say that last part again.
So Louis Rivera testified that he had a certain phone number.
Right.
If the government's saying that it's now unreliable, it's their evidence, they got it from Apple, directly from Apple, but their belief is, well, it could have been entered in by Louis Rivera. Well, it would still then be admissible for the purpose of impeaching Luis Rivera. Because if Luis Rivera is entering into his iPhone a different phone number, it impeaches his testimony that a different phone number belongs to him.
Is this the complete record?
That's what we received in discovery, along with the business record certification and also the search warrant that was sent to Apple by investigator Bennett. And that was the response that they received.
As you understand this, the full record, Ms. Kappelman?
I have no reason to dispute that, Your Honor. I don't know the answer.
It's very confusing, truthfully. It looks like what it's showing is that that Rivera bought a phone on February 11th, 2013, an iPhone. But some of the dates in here are very confusing because one of the pages in here shows an inception date of 10/17/12, which doesn't really make any sense. We have an inception date before 6 months before he bought the phone. I don't know. Have you asked somebody to attempt to explain that?
Your Honor, we're not going to be arguing any of that. So I can tell Your Honor the answer to that. It's you set up an iCloud account, you set up your Apple account, and that can predate the phone that's set up. The only reason why we're bringing this in right now is specifically as to the phone number that's entered in there. The reason that this is so necessary, the government is going to argue that Catherine McVanwell was calling a phone number that the first 3 digits after the area code was 934. And Luis Rivera got up on the stand and he goes, that's my phone number, 934, I think it's 1165. He testified and he said that. And they're going to say, well, there's communication between that phone number that Luis Rivera has identified as his own and Catherine McVanwell before the June trip and before the July trip. The information that they received, that the government received from Apple, from their search warrant, was for a phone number that is 1 digit different. It's 935-1165. Whether it was entered in by Luis Rivera, whether it is the actual assigned phone number to him, it is admissible. If it's him entering it in, it's to impeach his testimony. If it's not considered to be impeachment, we have the business record certification. It is absolutely relevant that the number that Apple has for Luis Rivera is not the phone number that he's saying is his, and the phone number that the government is going to say was communicating with Catherine McVanwell before the June trip and before the July trip. I believe for the government to argue in light of this known evidence. Yeah.
I'm gonna allow it in, but I want you to be careful. Do not argue that this is a phone record for 305-935-6615. It is not. It is a record from Apple relating to his purchase of a phone or perhaps the setting up of an iCloud in which they have noted this is the subscriber information provided by the customer. That's different than saying this is a phone record for this phone number. It is not a phone record for this phone number. So there are many explanations for how that could be. It could be right, it could be wrong. That's what they have listed as subscriber information. I don't want to hear any argument to the contrary on it, but I will allow it in evidence. Right? Further?
That's all, Your Honor.
Anything else? Right? See y'all at 8:30. If what? With testimony? Yeah. We won't send it to the jury. I just trying to figure out what you're asking me. No, it's not going to go to the jury tomorrow. Hopefully we'll get the testimony finished.